Welcome back to the Young Turks, everybody. I am John Adarola, joined by Michael Shore and Anna Kasparian, back on the show 2 days in a row.
What? Oh my, that's never happened before.
So crazy. And I believe it's going to be...
I couldn't believe when I walked in today and I saw Anna here again.
I know.
Exactly.
I mean, they might hire me full time.
Yeah, I've advised them against it. So
I would advise Anna against it.
It's us three for both hours, right?
Yes.
Okay, it's a big day in the news. Very different show than yesterday. We're going to be starting off with some pretty serious, potentially world-changing news. And then at some point, we are going to get to, at least as of right now, the ultimate fate of Steve Bannon as a result of the publishing of Fire and Fury. So we will be getting to that at some point, but starting off with big, perhaps upcoming international news. We're gonna start over here. Right now, as we're live, the White House is apparently considering launching a preemptive attack on North Korea. But don't worry, they're pretty sure it won't lead to a nuclear apocalypse. And that is basically the rhetoric that they are using to defend this plan. The attack has been dubbed the bloody nose strategy. React to some nuclear or missile test with a targeted strike against a North Korean facility to bloody Pyongyang's nose and illustrate the high price the regime could pay for its behavior. Unfortunately, that could then be followed by evidence of the high price we could all pay for the White House's behavior. But let's wait a little bit for that. Both the Daily Telegraph and the Wall Street Journal have reported on the divided White House, with both publications portraying Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis as trying to caution President Donald Trump against the strike, while National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster is advocating for it. So they want to use the pretext of some sort of test or something like that to attack North Korea, and the gamble is that he will not actually respond in the way that the opinion of his psychology might lead you to think he might. Certainly the statements from the North Korean regime imply that any sort of attack will be interpreted as the beginning of all-out war, and that could have tragic consequences. Let's go over some numbers really fast. This is last November, the Congressional Research Service looked into how conflict with North Korea could actually play out in the first few days. And they said that given population densities on the peninsula, military conflict could affect upwards of 25 million people on either side of the border, including at least 100,000 US citizens. And even if North Korea uses only its conventional munitions, meaning they do not choose to fire a nuclear missile, estimates range from between 30,000 and 300,000 dead in the first days of fighting, citing North Korea's ability to fire 10,000 rounds per minute, a reference to something I've brought up multiple times over the past few years, which is that not too far from the border, the mountains in North Korea are littered with North Korean artillery. In many cases, areas have been dug out of the mountains, making it extremely hard to actually take out this artillery. And so you don't need any missiles, you don't need any nukes. They can rain hell on Seoul and kill hundreds of thousands of people in a very short period of time. They also predict, the Congressional Research Service, that could eventually bring China, Russia, Japan into the mix as well, which would have huge additional numbers of casualties potentially. That's if there's no nuclear response. Now they are saying they will respond with nuclear weapons.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand what this would accomplish. And I know that in Trump's mind, he thinks this will scare North Korea off. It'll, escalate the situation somehow because they'll be so afraid of our, nuclear capability or our military capabilities at least. But I don't think that's the case. I mean, it doesn't seem as though, Kim Jong-un is completely unaware of what we're capable of,
and also unaware.
Okay, only you could make me laugh during this very serious story. But anyway, I also wanted to make a point about how all of the media, at least so far, the reporting that I've seen, makes it seem as though Trump is sitting there having these talks and these negotiations with, Mattis and H.R. McMaster and Tillerson. Like, we talked about his schedule yesterday. He's not really, in the nitty-gritty of this situation.
Right.
No, I don't buy it. And so my fear is that he will make an uneducated, uninformed decision that could lead to a lot of people losing their lives. I don't think that this is gonna accomplish anything. And one of the commentators that I read, one of the political pundits that I read said, well, it would really harm Kim Jong-un's standing in the international world.
What would
or
harm
in
it?
his international standing.
How could you harm that? I mean,
exactly. Really, that's your
what would harm?
like that his standing. The people taking him seriously.
Would be harmed as a result of
yes.
what?
Yeah.
As a result of
us
Trump
attacking
carrying out this attack.
Well, but the thing, yes, technically,
and Un not responding to it.
Definitely. I mean, he basically what he has to exert influence is the threat of violence. If he is given an opportunity to use it and chooses not to, it doesn't mean that he couldn't in the future employ the weapons. He would still have them and all that, but he would lose some of that threatening presence, certainly. Now, of course, if he chooses to respond to it and it does lead to all-out war, he will likely die along with probably most of the people in North Korea, I would imagine.
The timing of all this is strange.
Well, it's not strange actually, because this is what happens when they write a book. This is the kind of distraction that a president does, and presidents and administrations have done to keep your mind off of what's happening.
You're right, and that's what I meant when I said strange. Like you should be paying attention to when these types of news stories are coming out, because I think the book is one component of it. And remember, this is happening while North Korea and South Korea are finally, talking and negotiating with one another. And later in the show, we'll talk about how North Korea is actually going to send some of its athletes to South Korea for the Winter Olympics. And all of a sudden, boom, Trump comes out with this. So it isn't an accident.
And the countries that were mentioned, John, Russia, China, they didn't mention Japan. They didn't mention South Korea. And South Korea has the most to lose here, because that is where the first direct response would come. China.
Well, I think the implied idea is that South Korea is involved in any conflict. They were saying that in addition, China, Russia, and Japan could be brought in. Right. Obviously, South Korea is going to be a part of it.
And we don't even have, we point this out all the time, we don't have an ambassador to South Korea. We don't have anybody who could call up and get on the State Department phone and tell Rex Tillerson, I know you're not pushing for this, but you have to stop this, because this is what's going to happen in that case. It's not that we have nobody there, but we are woefully undermanned and underwomaned out there in the State Department, and that is a big, big problem. And another part of this thing that is under discussed is what it means, and you might be getting to this, about the way he's getting his information. We shouldn't know that McMaster's saying this, and Tillerson and
well, it's likely it is one of those three.
It is, but the fact that we're privy to McMaster's pushing for it, the other two aren't, to show a divided White House. Forget who the president is, under any circumstances, terrible.
Well, what it seems, I mean, look, basically, I think that this is a great case study for what was revealed in Fire and Fury, how they actually operate. That he is not a person with a lot of thoughts of his own, who's overly influenced by the last person that talked to him. And so you get these factions that are duking it out to be the one to influence the president, all of them using leaking at various points to advance their agenda. So it could be that H.R. McMaster is leaking this, perhaps even exaggerating it, to give the view that this is a serious White House that is considering military attacks, and so you should take them seriously. Or it could be that Rex Tillerson or Mattis could be leaking this to get people to pay attention, so that hopefully he will back off of what it seems like, based on the pattern we've seen, is that very often Trump will just have these cyclical sort of thoughts, and he will get frustrated and he'll bring something up like, oh, North Korea, Rocket Man, oh, I really hate this guy, I want to do something about it. And they probably have, for a long period of time, been attempting to dissuade him from starting a nuclear holocaust. And so it could be that this is just the most recent way to try to step him off of that. Is it likely that on any given day he's simply going to launch the attack? Perhaps not. But we know that he can be sparked by something. And if tomorrow North Korea tests another missile, maybe that's the thing that causes him to want to attack. It is entirely possible that it's just a distraction. And it might be that we spend too much time talking about it. It's a topic we come back to every few weeks. But it is a topic in which hundreds of thousands of lives at the very least are on the line.
And it's also terrifying to know that this is, either in the back or the front of Trump's mind. And if there's any provocation from North Korea, this is a possibility, a further escalation of, potential nuclear war with a country that does not have a rational actor. Like, we're dealing with two countries that are not rational actors. I never thought I would say that about the United States, but the United States president, but he's not a rational actor.
Yeah, our only hope at this point is that the former CEO of Exxon can talk sense into him.
Well, it also awakens Congress. So I would imagine some people in Congress will try and use that avenue to talk sense into somebody. Maybe McMaster's the one that they should focus on.
Trump just wants to use his big button and prove that it works.
Right.
God, just Just use it in the privacy of your own home. Anyway, okay, so obviously we will keep you updated on that. If war breaks out, we'll probably cover it. But anyway, we do have to take our first break. When we come back, we're going to turn back to domestic political news with Donald Trump giving at least some idea of what the next big legislative push is going to be, which we'll break down after this.
I have decided that I'm going to get ripped. Okay.
What?
Okay.
Like physically?
Yeah. Okay. What? You don't believe me?
I 100% don't believe you.
I will get so ripped. Here's my prediction: that someone at TYT will say, "Cenk, you've got to stop working out."
We're tired of you winning.
So you don't believe me?
Cenk, you don't have time to like do your daily duties for the main show.
Duties. I don't even have time for your daily duties. Because what you guys don't know is how great my muscles already are.
It's absolutely possible, but you can't have Leah run to the food truck to get you like 2 different types of grilled cheeses with like tater tots for lunch. Like you can't have that anymore.
Let's see what happens.
You also have to go to the gym regularly.
Let's see what happens. All I'm saying is, let's see what happens. Have I ever been wrong about a prediction? Almost never.
I just shot a clip. It's time sensitive and it needs to be edited right now.
Did anybody call for an editor?
Need this in an hour.
But you're an editor too.
Fuck you.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. Before we jump back into the news, I wanted to read a tweet from Woke Poppy, who says, "We are grabbing the snake's tail and hoping it won't bite us. This man is so fucking dangerous." And I know that there's a lot of people who either do believe or want you to believe that, well, obviously he's not going to do that. And maybe he won't, it is unlikely, but there were a lot of people who felt like he wouldn't actually ban Muslims. He's not gonna try to actually ban transgender individuals in the military. They're not gonna really give trillions of dollars to the rich and huge tax cuts. He's not really gonna try to cut your health care. Well, they did all those things. So maybe we should worry about this as well. Anyway, with that, why don't we jump back into a little bit more. Today, in a televised meeting with both Democrats and Republicans, President Trump laid out sort of a vague roadmap for how their immigration reform process is going to go forward into the future. Here is discussion about one of the prime components that's getting, thankfully, a lot of coverage these days is the need to codify DACA into law once again. A lot of people at risk of losing their protected status, and here are his thoughts about that being a part of the reform.
And I don't know how you would feel about this, but I'd like to ask the question, what about a clean DACA bill now, and with a commitment that we go into a comprehensive immigration reform procedure?
I have no problem. I think that's basically what Dick is saying. We're going to come out with DACA. We're going to do DACA, and then we can start immediately on the phase 2, which would be comprehensive.
Would you be agreeable to that?
Yeah, I would like to do that. Go ahead. I think a lot of people would like to see that, but I think we have to do DACA first. And you folks are going to have to. You're one voice. You folks are going to have to come up with a solution. And if you do, I'm going to sign that solution. We have a lot of smart people in this room.
We need to take care of these DACA kids, and we all agree on that. 86% of the American public agrees on that.
I will say, when this group comes back, hopefully with an agreement, this group and others from the Senate, from the House, comes back with an agreement, I'm signing it. I mean, I will be signing it. I'm not going to say, oh, gee, I want this or I want that. I'll be signing it because I have a lot of confidence in the people in this room that you're going to come out with something really good.
My gut is to say, wow, he sounds like a great negotiator. Well, I mean, but I also, this perhaps is him recognizing that he doesn't know anything about this topic. It's more likely that he's just not interested.
It's also, I thought, and I don't know if you saw it the same way, coming out of the conversation we had yesterday and people had over the weekend of his sort of mental clarity, right? He seemed on today. Like it seemed like the White House said, we're gonna broadcast this thing. People are gonna be able to watch it. He seemed better. He didn't seem like someone who didn't know what was going on, except when it came to what it was. Like he put forward a good face, but he clearly is gonna piss people off by what he did. And he clearly made some mistakes, and he clearly doesn't really know the issues.
So what are the mistakes that he made?
Well, I mean, the mistakes he made politically from where he's sitting is everything you just saw there, because they're going to be right-wing Republicans. So what the hell was that, right?
About doing a clean DACA bill.
A clean DACA bill about finding a path to citizenship that some people don't even think they should have. Yeah. So I think that's important.
Yeah, remember his base has no compassion for the DACA recipients. So when he rescinded their protection, they were celebrating it. And so it's interesting to see how, at least for show, he seems supportive of protecting them. And he's gone back and forth on various occasions, but it's not gonna be a clean DACA bill. That's another thing. What you saw during that televised meeting is different from what's being reported in terms of what Trump is expecting from Democrats in order to give these DACA recipients the protection that they need to remain in the country. Yeah. So he wants to fund that border wall. And that will be funded if Congress signs on to it to the tune of tens of billions of dollars.
Yeah, and we're gonna have a little bit of video about that in just a bit.
But the point I wanted to quickly make, let me just finish up, is that he keeps reneging on things that he promised his base, and they still remain loyal to him, which I think is so interesting. So with the wall, okay, he might still want to fight to construct portions of that wall, but he said Mexico is going to pay for it. Obviously they're not. He's asking Congress for the funding for it. And then also he's talking about protecting DACA recipients, which I hope he does, but that is not what his base wanted. And they still seem pretty supportive of him, which is fascinating.
Yeah, maybe.
It's also, I'm sorry, John, you've been interrupted 3 times. Make it 4.
Cut his mic.
there was, of course, there was a full conversation that was had in that whole meeting. And Representative McCarthy, Kevin McCarthy from California, was sitting 2 down from Trump. And after Dianne Feinstein made the point of, hey, we have to do this in phases, DACA first, so we can get this taken care of because it will include some kind of border security because there's security in having people here and how their families maybe see each other. He went on, he interrupted after Trump agreed to it in a way, verbally, and said, hey, I want to make sure we clear this up. Hey, Mr. President, you know what she just said? She just said she wants to do DACA. Are you really going to agree to that? I don't think that's what we want. Yeah. So all that's going to be said, and this is, again, in front of the cameras, as Anna was pointing out. So after the cameras shut down, these other Republicans went in and said, hey, dum-dum, we know you don't understand anything that's going on, so let me go ahead and point this out to you. You're agreeing with Democrats right now because you don't know what's being said. So they're going to make sure he doesn't mess up.
Yeah, exactly. Like he needed to be reminded of what his position should actually be. But at the end of the day, I mean, like he can say whatever he wants, but he's also saying whatever you give me, I will sign.
Right,
which I call leadership. Which also means then it doesn't matter what promises he makes, or even he's saying we're going to do DACA and then we'll have comprehensive after that. But he also says that he'll accept whatever they give him, which could also be a complete dodge if he doesn't think, if he's hearing behind the scenes that they might not be able to do anything, then he didn't push for anything. He was relying on them. They failed. That's a way to avoid any sort of accountability as well. I mean, they could simply do a clean DACA bill. They could do that. It would be popular. I mean, not necessarily amongst their base, but their base isn't all they're going to need in these upcoming midterm elections. But they're not going to do the politically popular thing. And at the same time, you're pointing out how his base continues to stay with him. It is interesting that not just the DACA thing, but also a comprehensive, perhaps, pathway to citizenship. He said that he wants this to be a bill of love, which just, that's weird. He's also going to Davos soon, which is like he's doing a lot of things that you wouldn't necessarily have expected, but that is what you get out of a person who doesn't really have any thoughts or positions and is just sort of, I think his brain was described as 9 fireflies buzzing around in a glass jar. I mean, you get some random stuff every once in a while.
I like to think of him as a branch on a willow tree during a hurricane. Like he's just all over the place.
That's poetic.
Yes, that is nice. But
like
the point is also, I've never seen anything like this. An open conversation with the president and Democrats and Republicans for the entirety of their meeting. It's usually at the very beginning or they let the president at the end, which I think is nice, but it's also in Davos too. It's like the president's fine. That's what they're trying to say.
Yeah.
He's fine. We're going to put him in front of cameras. We're going to put him in front of them. But that's also dangerous because the more they do that, the more he's liable to not be, forget his mental stuff. Just make mistakes like he made today, where he seemed sharp. But
it's interesting because he usually acts or communicates in such a questionable way that watching that makes it seem as though he's lucid. He's not insulting people. He seems like he wants to bring people together. But any other president, the mistakes would be glaring. That would be the first thing that stands out.
Yeah, and like you said, there is a risk. I mean, after all, it was at a meeting like that where press were allowed to ask questions at the end, where he gave his fire and fury quote, inflaming tensions with North Korea. So let's jump to another area of this conversation. One of the priorities for both Donald Trump and the Republicans going into this immigration push is border security. For some of them, it might just mean wasting $10+ billion on, eventually we're just gonna have mech suits patrolling the border. Like every president, we hire 500,000 more people, we throw more money into it, and it doesn't solve the problem because it's not really related to the problem. The problem has to do with international labor markets and the ability of people in the US to hire people who are undocumented. As long as they're able to do that, which they can, and want to do it, which they do, they're gonna continue to do it, but we're gonna waste money in one of several forms. Trump obviously wants the wall. So here we have a representative talking about the actual facts of whether a wall would stop illegal immigration, which you're gonna see in this clip.
The wall itself, Mr. President, you talk to your Border Patrol chief or the former Border Patrol chiefs, I've asked them, how much time does the wall buy you? They'll say a couple minutes or a few seconds. And this is our own Border Patrol chiefs that have said that.
It's not mine. Mine doesn't even clear the wall works. It's not, the wall works.
They say without the wall, we cannot have border security. And all you have to do is ask Israel. Look what happened with them.
That's a good example. I think that we should be patterning ourselves after that. Here's why he wants the wall. Because he said it once and the crowd liked it, and because he is a simple-minded person that thinks, oh, it's a wall. You can't physically walk through a wall, so case closed.
But it's got to be a transparent wall as well.
Yeah, lately it's been a transparent wall. Sometimes it's a virtual wall. I don't think anybody knows because certainly he doesn't. But yeah, as Representative Kuehler, I think was his name.
Cuellar.
Thank you. No, you can go over a wall. You can dig under a wall. A lot of places can't have a wall. That's the problem with walls. But okay, they're still planning on spending something like $18 billion on it.
It still doesn't solve the issue of people overstaying their visas. I mean, like it's just, it's such a childish way of approaching a complicated issue that, look, I agree, I want border security, right? But I want it to be smart. I don't want to throw tens of billions of dollars towards something that will be ineffective.
But it's also why smart people like Cuellar, like Feinstein, like Durbin, who are sitting there, I think they understand the politics of this. Let's, the wall makes no sense. But if we're willing to call it border security, he's willing to buy it. Let's get DACA, and then let's play with the wall later. And I think that's kind of the approach the Democrats are taking here. Who really
well, they'd like it, but are they going to be able to do that?
We don't know. But if the president is saying DACA and then border security, then it seems possible. If Democrats, if smart people are buying it, not just Democrats, but Republicans who either fear it or endorse it, who are also smart, then I think that means it's out there and possible to have happen.
The unfortunate thing, at least in the medium term, is that obviously the Democrats are going into this needing to solve this problem with DACA, but knowing that something else in that bill is probably going to be something distasteful both to them and their constituents. Donald Trump is president, so that's what we get. This wouldn't even be a problem right now. DACA would have already been solved a long time ago if we didn't have Republican leadership in the House and Senate and Donald Trump in the White House. But get ready to be disappointed, even if they're successful and they have a legislative fix for DACA in the short term. And time is running out, by the way. Okay, let's turn to a related issue. Former sheriff and pardoned convict Joe Arpaio isn't done being in the news. He is now going to be running in the Republican Senate primary race to fill the seat vacated by Jeff Flake, correct?
Yeah.
Yes, so he wants to be the next senator from the great state of Arizona. And he's given some quotes about some of the things he'd like to do if he were to get into office. We've been talking about immigration. We'll continue to because that's one of his plans. Here's what he says. I have a far out plan which may look stupid. Well, let's see. When they come to your attention that they're here illegally, these young people, deport them back to Mexico or whatever, and then try to put them on a fast track to come back to the United States legally with special permits. What's wrong with that? They'd say they don't know where their home country is because some of them have literally never been there or haven't been there in 18 years. Because it might take, so let them go there and spend 6 months because it might take that long to do paperwork to get them here legally, and let them see their home country and see what it's really like. That would be no amnesty. Everybody would be happy. You deport them and then let them come back with all their education here. I'm sure they could find a temporary job or help the foreign countries and build up relations and come back. That's just a big picture that I have. People may say I'm crazy. What am I crazy about? It just makes sense.
He opened with, it may look stupid, and ends with, it just makes sense. So that's really, those are his words.
Well, one of those is right, I think. I'll let the audience decide. So yeah, these young people that they don't necessarily have any family they know of there, they have no actual memories of this place, they can find a temporary job, deport them for 6 months or a year. What's the difference? Who wouldn't like that?
He loves attention. He's 85 years old, right?
He would be the 86-year-old freshman junior senator from Arizona.
Who literally said that he should be elected because they need fresh blood. He needs fresh blood to last through his first term.
Senate terms are 6 years long. 6 years long. Anyway, look, I know that people probably get really uncomfortable when I bring up age, but I don't care. 85? No, Feinstein, same situation. Time to retire.
She's 84,
give someone
correct?
else. She's 84, yes, but say around the same age. Look, I really want young people to become inspired enough to, first of all, go to the polls and vote. But more importantly, or just as importantly, go out there and get involved in politics, run. We do need fresh blood, right? And we need people who have a new vision for the country. Arpaio is not an example of that. He's just not an example of that.
To break the politics down here in a sort of in a duller but maybe more interesting way than Anna just did. I mean, the difference between Feinstein and Arpaio would be that Feinstein at 84 is a multi-term senator who has leadership, and and the way the seniority in the Senate works, she has greater influence than a Joe Arpaio would have on his first day. So it's not totally fair to compare the two of them, but you do need younger people coming in here because these are issues that affect younger people. So you talk about immigration.
He's literally talking about young people.
He's literally talking about young people, and that's where they need it. Also, Arizona is a tricky state right now. This is, as you said, Jeff Flake's seat. Kelly Ward, who is a Trump acolyte there in Arizona, is already running in the primary. Arpaio would challenge her, and that would bring possibly Martha McSally, who's kind of a more mainstream Republican, into the race, right? So she comes in, and now she looks a little better because the other two would fight over it, and that would be done with.
The more extreme,
the more extremes would fight with each other, and then Kristen Sinema, the Democrat, would stand to gain a lot by that. The other thing, and it's morbid to talk about, but they may have another Senate election sooner rather than later. They're a special election if John McCain, if his illness makes it difficult for him to be a senator anymore. And so, so you have Arpaio's name in the hat now for potentially 2 Senate races. It's absurd, and they're giving him this space, and it's killing Arizona Republicans.
Well, let's make it a little bit more absurd, because obviously when we've talked about one of the issues, perhaps is his age. I think for a lot of people that will be an issue. There are other issues. So if you've never heard of Joe Arpaio, you don't know anything about him, let's talk about just a few things that
You're pardoned for not having heard of him.
You're pardoned. Let's see. So as we said, he's a former sheriff. He says the most controversial, toughest sheriff in the country. He was tough in some ways, certainly created tough situations for people, like the many people who killed themselves in his jails because of how terrible the situations there were. Now, some were ruled to be suicides. Others, nearly half of the deaths, as reported by the Phoenix New-Times, were not explained at all. Nearly half of the deaths in his jails were never explained. We don't know what happened there. Let's see. One woman lost her baby due to negligence of the jail staff, and then had a guard protest when the hospital let her see the dead child before the funeral. So she lost the baby. Then they didn't want her to see it in one of his. He once framed an innocent person for an assassination plot against him that his team had invented for publicity. So that's out there. Let's see. His SWAT team once conducted a raid on a house expecting to find a weapons cache, only they had gotten the wrong house. But that's not where it ends. They burned the house down in the process and then forced the family's dog, which was trying to escape, back into the house.
Oh my God.
Where it was burned to death.
Okay.
There's a lot of lighter stuff too. Those are some of the standout things that Joe Arpaio has done, which might be coming to the Senate in the near future. But in terms of the stakes, you pointed out some of the political calculations. Arizona is a state where Trump won by 4 points. On that same night, Arpaio lost. So if he does become the candidate, this is one of, if the Democrats are going to take control, a needed pickup opportunity. Arpaio, as terrible as he is, like Roy Moore, might drastically increase the odds of getting it. Anyway, okay, why don't we take one more break? When we come back, let's see, did you know that Rick Perry is still Secretary of Energy? We're going to check in with him after this break. I don't know if he did, but he's back in the news today. We'll be back shortly.
I know what you're thinking.
I love how you do something with your lips when you play the sound clips.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Look at his lips.
I was a woman.
No, you're closing your mouth. Usually I'll be like, and I'm like, is he like lip syncing it?
I don't know. I never noticed it until you said it.
It's a funny habit.
It's not human intelligence!
TYT member.
They're kicking me out the door. They're kicking me out the door.
They'd rather lose to Republicans than have a progressive win with them. That's how dumb the corporate Democrats are.
It's the Democrats who lull you to sleep, and at the end of the day, they're the ones who push the right-wing agenda.
This is why you lost to Trump, you fucking moron. What the fuck is wrong with you? Whoever wrote that, I'm sure they were typing with one hand and going like this with you. The Democrats are dead. The way you feel right now, that's how a chump feels.
Do
not freak out.
Hey, Dave. As you can probably see, Skype froze.
Yes.
Frozen and crashed.
You know, I'm watching that documentary on the Vietnam War, and there was a TV journalist in the middle of some tiny little village in Vietnam doing live TV as the soldiers were burning the Vietnamese huts, and it didn't crash. And that was 1965, and he was in Vietnam.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. Anna, Michael, and John. I want to read a couple tweets. Gabby Marita tweeted in, there's a 0% chance that Trump knows what DACA stands for. And I will add that there's a 5% chance that if you told him what it stood for, he could then tell you what the acronym was. We also have a comment. This was from the YouTube super chat.
0% chance he knows what it stands for.
I think very few people probably do. Hopefully they know what it is at the very least. That's more important, I guess. But Matthew McCurdy on YouTube super chat said this: impeach a sitting president during wartime, ? And that's a good point. I mean, I guess in a very real sense, we will never ever not be in wartime again, but we've forgotten about some of those wars. We don't talk about them that much. But if we had a new war, especially a really bad one in the Koreas, come on, are you gonna remove a guy from office then?
The war in the Koreas would also be a more classic conventional war too than the wars that we're engaged in now.
So rather than like an intractable quagmire, it would be a tens of thousands dying per day.
Protecting America war. You know, that's a little. Yeah. Even though the other.
I would argue if you want to protect America, impeach him.
Well, I would argue alongside you, John.
Yeah, but let's be fair. All the other candidates, probably Bernie would have nuked North Korea as well. Anyway, okay, jumping back into the news. It is looking increasingly likely over the past few days, with all the news that's coming out, that the Robert Mueller investigatory team might actually want a sit-down, face-to-face interview with the president, with Donald Trump. Mueller apparently brought up the issue of interviewing Trump during a late December meeting with the president's lawyers, John Dowd and Jay Sekulow. Apparently, the special counsel's team could interview Trump very soon on some limited portion of questions, possibly within the next several weeks, according to a person close to the president who was granted anonymity to describe internal conversations, saying this is moving faster than anyone really realizes. They said that Trump is comfortable participating in an interview, of course, and believes it would put to rest questions about whether his campaign coordinated with Russia in the 2016 election.
Of course he'd think that.
Look, he might be comfortable with it.
No, I have no doubt that he's comfortable with it.
Yeah.
But should he be comfortable with it? No. Again, that's that unearned confidence that Trump is so well known for. He doesn't realize how much he gets himself into trouble by the things he tweets, the things that he says out loud. He rambles. I don't know. The fact that he thinks that doesn't surprise me, but I think he's wrong.
Yeah, I mean, look, I tweeted last night, if he has even 2 brain cells in his head, he will never, ever allow himself to answer questions before Mueller or the team. But I mean, look, that would require a certain amount of self-awareness and knowledge about how you are and the likelihood of it working well for you. He's not big on self-awareness.
He openly said during an interview that he fired Comey because of the Russia investigation. He openly admitted that. And he doesn't understand that the things he says consistently get him in trouble. So I really hope they do interview him. It'll be wonderful.
Well, look, we're a bunch of progressives like us. Obviously, we're not on the president's side. What do some of the conservatives think? What do other people think? Well, let's turn now to Judge Napolitano talking about what Trump's strategy should be.
Whether or not the president ought to submit to an interview to Bob Mueller and FBI agents. And my argument is never, never, never in caps should he do that.
Why?
Because he cannot know what Mueller and his team know about the case. He cannot know what evidence they have. And one lie or one close to a lie about a material matter, and he's facing a potential indictment. I don't know what would happen with the indictment because he's a sitting president. No sitting president has ever been indicted for a crime. But if the feds want to trap you, they are very, very good at doing it. Donald Trump is a very headstrong person who probably believes he is smarter than his interrogators, and he may be, but he doesn't know more about the case than they do. It's a trap, and he ought to stay away from it.
I love that, and he may be.
No, well, he's not.
Come on, Judge Napolitano, come on.
I know.
But look, I mean, I think there might be some people, maybe if you had Sean Hannity talk about this, he might say, yes, he should go talk because I have faith in my dear leader. But almost everyone else, especially the people around Trump, know that this should not happen. That if there is anyone who can, sit in that sort of environment, basically facing a set of people who are piranha in suits, who are there to shred the flesh from your bones, it would not be Donald Trump. Obviously, his lawyers certainly don't want it, which is why they've come up with a couple of alternative ideas of what Trump should do. Here are some of the options. In addition to the possibility of suggesting the president submit written responses in place of an interview, a second person familiar with the president's legal strategy said another possibility being contemplated was an affidavit signed by the president affirming he was innocent of any wrongdoing and denying any collusion. Well, that should end the discussion there. I mean, if he signs it, come on, what more could you want at that point? And so that's what they're thinking of. They're going to ridiculous lengths to try to get him out of having to sit down.
Well, which they should do. His team, I mean, if you're the president's legal team, that's what you're supposed to do. That's what they did with Bill Clinton when he sat down and was deposed at that point by Kenneth Starr. I guess it was an interview, but I don't know if it was a deposition or I think it was a deposition. I don't know what the difference is, but deposition sounds better.
We're not lawyers.
No, we're not lawyers. But so that's how they should defend him, and these are the things they should be offering. But there's no way that the independent prosecutor, independent counsel should accept that either.
So that's the question that I wanted to ask because I'm not a lawyer and I'm unaware of how it would work if they do try to dodge Trump testifying or talking to any investigators. Is he able to get out of that? Like, is it really?
I've been doing some research.
Great, because he's the one under investigation. So, I mean, in any other context, the person under investigation doesn't get to say, like, I'm going to give you a written statement that says that I didn't do any collusion.
Well, he still says that he's not under investigation, but
does it come down to the difference between an independent prosecutor and independent counsel?
I mean, it could well. That goes like when it was set up. I did know all of the differences. Now there are differences in terms of the subpoena power and all of that, but. We're going to get to that in 1 second. First, why does it matter? I mean, you could have him in, or you could ask your questions and have him do written responses. Well, Chuck Rosenberg, former chief of staff. Let's bring up this graphic. We'll show you a quote to James Comey. So might be involved a little bit in understanding sort of the rationale here. It says the prosecutors want to see and hear folks in person. They want to probe and follow up, asking follow-up questions. Body language and tone are important, and they want answers directly from witnesses, not from their lawyers, which of course is what written answers would be. The odds of prosecutors agreeing to written responses are somewhere between infinitesimally small and zero. Not necessarily zero, of course. So I don't think anyone necessarily knows exactly what would happen if he says, no, you have to come in here. But there are some prior Supreme Court statements about things like this that might give us an idea. So back in 1974, the Supreme Court said, the president's generalized assertion of privilege must yield to the demonstrated specific need for evidence in a pending criminal trial and the fundamental demands of due process of law in the fair administration of criminal justice. Obviously during another time of sort of impending constitutional crises at that point.
It's so telling though, John and Anna, whenever you talk about Donald Trump and all his troubles, let's go back to Nixon, right? I mean, it's always that's who he's always being compared to.
Not just Nixon though. We have a little bit on Bill Clinton though.
Well, all right. Well, and Clinton, which we did before, but I mean, but really Nixon when it talks about the prosecutorial powers in the judiciary.
Exactly, yeah, and possibly with similar charges coming up as Nixon. But the Supreme Court, in reference to Bill Clinton, said it's settled law that the president is subject to judicial process in appropriate circumstances, which gets a little bit vague there. We have made clear that in a criminal case, the powerful interest in the fair administration of criminal justice requires that the evidence be given under appropriate circumstances, lest the very integrity of the judicial system be eroded. And I'm sure that they would make the case that appropriate circumstances are not on a pad of paper, they are in person with follow-up questions. And so, I mean, we're going to have to wait to see because they said just a few weeks potentially, but they also said that would be a limited set of questions. It could be that that's not the only time they talk to him. And as Judge Napolitano talked about, they may have no idea of what they've already found out. It could be questions about Russia. It could be questions about money laundering, as Steve Bannon has predicted.
What I really respect about the Mueller investigation is how there haven't, at least as far as I know, there haven't been leaks. And Mueller himself hasn't accidentally or intentionally said something publicly that he shouldn't be saying.
Just a few small ones about impending indictments, basically.
Right, but that's, I mean, that doesn't really give you much. And
those were leaked by the lawyers of the people that were being indicted too, not necessarily.
Oh, were they really?
Yeah, it's not coming from Mueller directly. But I really respect that about him. Look, I know that politically there are disagreements with me and Mueller, between myself and Mueller. But I like the way that he's carrying out this investigation because I feel like in any other circumstance, there would be a ton of leaks, there would be a ton of information that shouldn't be getting out there. I want this investigation to be fair, and the only way for that to happen is for leaks to not occur.
Yeah,
so.
It's dripping with integrity so far.
Yeah.
When the audience at Fox News sees Judge Napolitano say, hey, it's a trap, which every Fox person at this point on major shows enough knows that Trump is watching. So he gave his legal advice to Trump directly. He's probably figured in his head. He goes, hey, just so you know, don't do it, it's a trap. I think you're smart enough, you're just not. But so when all that goes down, shouldn't the next response from anyone who's watching clearly go, well, obviously there's something, or else you wouldn't tell your client in this case not to do it because you're gonna get caught up in something. I remember back in the Bush administration, I was looking for some of these quotes. I was talking to Anna about it before the show. Hey, if you have nothing to hide, what are you running from? When we're talking about our wiretapping, our surveillance program. Hey, if you have nothing to hide, why are you worried about being watched? If you have nothing to hide, if nothing has happened, if you have nothing to lie about, why would we be worried about you going into an interview with Mueller and lying?
Well, that's why he caught himself when he said any lie or anything approaching a lie could be,
And remember, the right wing, those who are supportive of Trump, continuously paint this investigation as a political move by the left,
a witch
right?
hunter.
A witch hunt by the left. And they are now constantly questioning the integrity of Mueller, which is hilarious because in the beginning they loved the fact that Mueller was, appointed to special counsel or as special counsel. It's just really interesting to see how they're trying to do this. So it doesn't surprise me that he's trying to make it seem as though, oh, Mueller's just there to trap you, and try to mislead you into confessing or saying things that'll get you in trouble. It's nonsense.
Okay, well, why don't we turn to something slightly different? We got a little bit more time, two more things hopefully we will get to. Rick Perry is still the Secretary of Energy, and although he hasn't been making news a lot, he has actually had a plan that has been ongoing over the course of the past year. Rick Perry and Donald Trump have this plan to do effectively a bailout for some of the dirtiest energy currently being used in the US. And so last year he issued a notice of proposed rulemaking that would affect the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And what this did was issue a rule ensuring full cost recovery for power plants with a 90-day supply of fuel on hand. So obviously, what kind of power plants have a 90-day supply of fuel on hand? Probably not the solar or wind type, because that's not how it works. It's the ones who can stockpile nuclear material, coal, and things of that sort, perhaps natural gas as well. And so the idea there is we're worried that these industries might be going down. And so we're going to just throw government money at them, which doesn't exactly sound like the sort of thing you'd expect out of a conservative government where they'd be choosing clear winners and losers in a marketplace like energy. But that's what they were doing. And so there's this regulatory commission that had to look at this plan. The lone Democrat that Trump actually put on it, Richard Glick, characterized the proposal as a, quote, multi-billion-dollar bailout targeted at coal and nuclear, which seems fair enough to me. But they had an argument for why they needed to do this, and it was twofold. Subsidies for renewable energy are driving coal and nuclear plants out of business, because that's where all the subsidies are going. And the loss of those plants is hurting the reliability and resilience of the electric grid. So 2 points. On the first one, I would say good. By Felicia when it comes to the coal plants and the nuclear plants. That's the entire point. If it's driving them out of business, if they're being replaced by solar and wind and other clean, renewable forms of energy, mission accomplished. Land on the aircraft carrier, okay? That's the point, but they find it to be a bad thing.
Isn't that supposed to be how the free market works?
Right.
Yeah.
It looks like, I mean, they're trying to pitch it as they're driving them out because of subsidies. But we know where subsidies are going. They're going to oil and things like that. They're going to nuclear.
Yes.
Now, in any event, so they also have the other part. They're saying, well, we can't allow them to go out of business because we need a certain level of reliability of the electrical grid. And if conservatives have one belief about renewable energy, it's that you can't rely on the sun or the wind. Personally, I think the sun's pretty reliable. I have occasionally bet on whether it would rise in the morning. It seems to every day. But they think you need coal and nuclear. But unfortunately for them, there was an analysis of how different forms of energy, different sorts of power plants are or are not reliable. They want you to believe coal and nuclear are the way to go, that you just bet on coal, but that's not the way that the actual analysis worked out. In that it was said, coal and nuclear generators face resilience challenges of their own. As has been well documented, many coal and nuclear plants with significant on-site fuel supplies have failed to function during extreme weather events because those fuel supplies froze, flooded, or were otherwise unavailable. We saw that in Texas actually just a few months ago. In fact, initial reports indicate that coal-fired facilities accounted for nearly half of all forced outages in PJM, that's 13 states basically along the East Coast, during last year's period of extreme temperatures. And they have similar things for nuclear as well. And so if you were actually worried about the resiliency and reliability of the energy grid, you would not be going with something with a demonstrated track record of not holding up when you need it most, which it would be coal and in some cases nuclear.
At those times, that's when you need reliable, and this is unreliable. And this is coming from the same people. And Rick Perry, his whole life, was talked about as a governor, free market, just as you were saying, this isn't the free market. And these are people who've been opponents to affirmative action in all its forms. And this is affirmative action for coal and nuclear, and now they like it because we know who lines their pockets, and we know that this president ran and said in front of multiple audiences, I'm big on coal, I'm a coal guy, and this was him trying to get it. But it turns out, thank goodness for regulatory commissions, because even though he appointed them, they said, well, this is ridiculous. And it's more of an affront to Rick Perry than it is to the president.
Yeah. I don't want anyone to forget how dumb Rick Perry is. And I don't say that simply to insult him. I say that in reference to this story because there was another argument that he made, a case for why we need to boost coal and nuclear. He argued that solar power and wind power puts national security in jeopardy. But how? Because climate change certainly puts national security in jeopardy. That's one of the leading concerns when it comes to national security. How does renewable energy equal national security concerns? Well, I don't understand.
There was that one town council, I don't remember which state it was in, but we reported on it, that was said they were worried that if solar power became too common, it could drain the sun of its energy, and we need the sun undrained. I looked into it. It's a risk we can take, I think. But anyway, the reason we wanted to cover this, of course, is because this is good news. In this case, thankfully, this regulatory board, which was staffed by Trump people, did the right thing. God only knows how long this decision will last. Perhaps this idea to do this bailout will come back. But lurking in the background is other good news. As we've pointed out multiple times on the show, market forces are making it so that renewable energy will become more common, because despite the attempts by the right wing to renew coal and all that, or imply that you could renew coal, which very few people believe is going to happen, solar energy is becoming year by year far cheaper. Battery capacity, which allows renewable forms of energy like wind and solar to become more reliable by storing tons of energy during periods of peak activity and then using it when sun and wind are at lower levels. That's just becoming, through technological advancement, better and better and cheaper in a way that coal and oil cannot match. So that's the good news for today.
Yeah, we'll take it.
Why don't we jump to one more story? Okay. Steve Bannon is out at Breitbart. So we've been talking for about 5 days about a book, which again shocks me as a reader in America, but Fire and Fury, the tell-all about the Trump White House, with all of its many revealing quotes about Steve Bannon and what he thinks about the president, what he thinks about the president's inner circle and family, led to Bannon apologizing for those quotes, perhaps most memorably where he called the Trump Tower meeting treasonous and bad shit and unpatriotic. So he apologized and he apologized, but it was not good enough for now, and he has been forced out of Breitbart. We've got a little statement.
That's good news too. It's like a double good news.
There you go. I don't know how good it is, but it is good news. Now they put out a statement from the company's chief executive saying Mr. Bannon and Breitbart will work together on a smooth transition. And Bannon added that he was proud of what the Breitbart team has accomplished in so short a period of time in building out a world-class news platform. Yes, it is amazing how much racism they've been able to stoke in such a short period of time. But yeah,
but they'll find a new Grand Dragon soon enough.
I think they'll be okay. I think that under his leadership and the team he has assembled, I think that they can stoke racial animus and all of that on their own now. I think he can let them go now and flourish on their own. But for Bannon, what's interesting about this is that he apparently did not see this coming. Just days before he stepped down, he insisted to friends and others that he wasn't going anywhere, according to 2 different sources that had spoken with him. He said he expected to remain at Breitbart's helm and believed he would remain an influential figure in conservative politics. And he's also said in recent days that he was keeping his plans alive to build up a public nonprofit, Citizens of the American Republic, insisting that he would have funding from other GOP donors, even if the Mercers had cut ties with him.
After Trump fired him and after he left the White House, the appeal for Steve Bannon and Breitbart was, look, we've got this guy who's a conduit to the White House and can come and rally our people. And then when it turned out that he was cut off from the White House, he was no good to Breitbart anymore after what he had done. So it was inevitable that this was going to happen. He'll land, but he won't land with the same influence, and he won't be side by side with candidates who think that his presence will be helpful anymore. Even the worst of the candidates, as Roy Moore was, who has not conceded yet, as Roy Moore was in Alabama, thought that, oh, having Bannon here was having a de facto opponent of the president who supported Luther Strange. The same thing, that dynamic is gone for Steve Bannon. So I think it's good news because a voice has been quieted, not the way we wanted it quieted, but that's a good thing too.
Yeah. I mean, I think it could be that this is game over. I mean, the guy's on the older side, but I don't know that it necessarily is. Not necessarily because, although everyone loves to say how smart he is and all that, well, I mean, we've learned a lot about what he did in the White House. I would question those intellectual credentials, but he is, I guess, adaptive, and he's certainly vicious. And I think an opportunity is being presented to him right now. So he's been cast out, and at least in the short term, it looks like most of Trump's backers and also the base are staying with Trump. But will they forever? I don't know. He's becoming much less popular. He might be pushing for a pathway to citizenship for illegals. He's going to be going to Davos, which is like the den of globalists internationally. And he gave a bunch of money to the rich. I mean, some of his base is going to figure that out eventually, and their health insurance is going to go up thanks to the changes that came in the tax bill. And so if Bannon can position himself as not the person who lost the favor of Trump, but the person who Trump lost the way from, this true Trumpism, this ethno-nationalism, or whatever you want to call white supremacy these days, then it could be that if his base does grow disaffected with Trump, they need to go with someone. And maybe they'll remember the glory days with Bannon in the past.
Right. Well, that's what do you think happens to Breitbart?
I think that Bannon is just one example of a group of monsters, to be quite honest with you. But I mean, Breitbart will still exist. They'll still do what they're doing. He's not the only person who spouts this type of vicious rhetoric when it comes to minorities and certain policies in the U.S. So I'm not really I'm not celebrating it as much as other people are, because I don't see this as much of a victory. There's still a huge portion of crazy right-wing conspiracy theory type people that get taken seriously, that sow fear and hatred in America. And it's a problem that I see growing, not dwindling down. I think it needs to be addressed in a different way.
I do, but what I think is so good about it is I think that it makes Breitbart start over a little bit as an organization, because their influence was just pounded because of Bannon. And so I feel like I think people equated Bannon with Breitbart, that they didn't know what Breitbart was, many people, before they knew who Bannon was. And then they started looking and noticing it. So I think that it hurts that organization. Not forever, like you said, but I do think that it's an important thing. They have to start again, and people are not going to be looking at them as influence makers right away without Bannon. So I think that's important. That's something.
Yeah, maybe. I guess we'll have to see. Anyway, I just would not be surprised to find him finding some sort of wealthy backer, some crazy billionaire who feels like Trump hasn't given enough.
Patreon tomorrow.
That's entirely possible. And suspiciously, it'll be raising him a lot of money really fast.
Yeah.
Weird how that sometimes works out. But anyway, that's all the news for the first hour. We're going to take a little break. And when we come back, we're going to be giving the reins over to Anna Kasparian. So we will see you in just a few.
Been easy for me. I started off in Brooklyn. My father gave me a small loan of $1 million. All my life, I was told no.
You said I had small hands. They're not small, are they? I never heard that one before.
All right, post-game here in Studio B. It's the green screen magic of internet television.
A lot of condom breaking stories.
Any conversation that starts with marriage is an interesting thing deserves a little bit of.
When the kid cries, perhaps that's that is an opportunity to do some. It's an opportunity to do some parenting.
Yeah, parenting is you cry, you're gone.
Oh my God!
I love that video.
Yeah, Ben, I got a great achoo. You're like, my mouth was open. She sneezed in my eye.
I used to have Donut Tower next to my desk.
Yeah, I'll dress up like a girl.
I sound confident now, Anna. When we're off the air, I'm gonna be like, how is this gonna work?
When you get literally asked why 21 straight times.
Yeah.
And like at some point, you're like, you're fucking with me now, right?
So I dumped the kids off at her mom's, and I drove down to La Jolla for a day.
Get out, kids.
They're like, but Daddy, no.
Why? What do you mean why? You asked me to look at you. You did it. You brought it up. You know you're doing it. Why? I don't know why. I was reading. She's lovely. Here's what's different. Like, it is a different feeling. Everybody says this, but it's 5:11 when we're shooting this. I can't wait to go home. Like that. I can't wait to see her.
What you guys do is allow us to be open and honest, and we don't have to worry about censorship, and we don't have to worry about sponsors telling us what we can and can't say. We're accountable by our audience and our audience only, and I absolutely love that. That's the best part about being a member. We love you guys.
That's 300 million. That's a pretty good number. We were doing a press release on it, and I got all worked up. And I said, okay, well, that's the size of the U.S. population. You know what our next target is? The size of the entire world on the road to 6 billion. Although by the time we hit it, it'll probably be 7, maybe 8 billion.
Not a big deal. A couple of days ago on the TYT network, we passed 1 billion views.
What the hell?
What the hell?
No, that's a big freaking deal.
2 billion views.
What now?
Sorry.
What did we do? 2 billion?
2 billion.
They said it couldn't be done, but it was done.
We just crossed 5 billion views on YouTube.
I mean, imagine 10 years ago thinking one day.
We looked at you like, are you nuts? Young Turks crosses 6 billion views.
They said you couldn't do it. You can't change the media. Don't try. Well, here we are. We're changing the media. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Back, everybody. Before Anna takes over, I've got a couple of tweets. Oh, also, I wanted to recognize 2 of our members, Danny Torres and Jessica Gray. Thank you for being members. I wish we still had the numbers. I don't know if they exist necessarily, but thank you for being members for however long it's been. 2 tweets in reference to one of the stories from the last hour. Ray for Madness says, if the FBI had any concrete evidence, they'd compel Trump to appear in an interview. That they're not doing that it's voluntary is a sign that they don't have anything objective, at least not yet. I apologize if I misspoke. There's nothing that indicates to me that they're doing a voluntary request to him. It's that we don't know exactly how it's going to go down yet, and so we're waiting to see. But I don't think that there has been a request for him to come in yet, and so it could still be a matter of timing. And Mark Fournier on the YouTube Super Chat says, I give it a 99% chance that Mueller will get fired via tweet 10 minutes after Trump leaves the interview room. He's gonna leave the room, sweat streaming down, streaking orange across his face, and then he's going to make up a name for him and tweet. Yeah. That's gonna happen.
Yeah.
So anyway, on to you.
All right, there is a lot of news I want to get to, and we promised you an update to Puerto Rico, and we are starting hour 2 with that story. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which is essentially taking a primary role in establishing the power grid in Puerto Rico is saying that there is now some progress because they ordered certain parts that they needed, and they should get those parts in the coming weeks. And maybe, if we're lucky, they'll finish the construction by late February, early March. So let me give you the details on that. The Army Corps of Engineers argued that, look, this is an old power structure, power grid, I should say. It's much older than what you would experience in the mainland. And so as a result, we had to go through quite a bit to get the parts that we needed. But more than 40% of Puerto Rico's power customers remain in the dark nearly 4 months after the Category 4 storm hit the island.
4 months. Wow.
4 months. I mean, think about how outraged Americans would be if that were the case in Houston, Florida, or in
if it was
Texas.
A week.
If it was
right. 4 months. 4 months is permanent, basically. That is forever. Imagine being a child and it's 4 months without power. I mean, power is not a luxury. It is essential for almost every area of life at this point.
So students just went back to school in Puerto Rico, and a lot of these schools still don't have power, but the kids needed to go back to school. They already have missed out on so much, and so they're just gonna have to make do with what they have. Only 20% of intersections with stoplights have been powered. That's how dire the situation really is. Now let's get to the missing parts that are supposed to be coming in coming weeks. So the lack of some of those hard to find pieces had delayed energizing certain lines, which included transformers, splices, and hundreds of a key small piece no longer in stock elsewhere. Just to give you an idea of Puerto Rico's energy infrastructure and how much it differs from the rest of the United States, it's about 44 years old compared with an average of 18 years on the US mainland. And also, most of the island should have power by the end of February or early March, but a complete restoration could actually take until May.
Which would have meant 9 months without power in some areas.
Yeah, it's a devastating situation, and remember in the beginning there was a very shady contract given to a small company that only had 2 employees, full-time employees at least. It was an extremely expensive contract, so they ended up terminating it after it got a lot of criticism in the media. And now there's all this. I don't know how much of what the Army Corps of Engineers is saying is truthful. I wouldn't be surprised if their energy infrastructure is older than the United States and they no longer make or manufacture some of these parts. But still, it just seems as though things are moving very slowly for the people of Puerto Rico, and I feel terrible for them.
Yeah. The number that stood out to me was they've ordered 6,000 transformers, and transformers are essential to spreading it, basically, to spreading the energy. And of those, just over 400, I don't remember the exact number, of 6,000 in 4 months have arrived on the island. So they're not going to be able to do anything until those transformers are, really up to 6,000 if that's what they need. I mean, it's unbelievable. So it's not just what's going on the ground. I almost feel for the Army Corps because they're the ones that go in there and do this. If you don't have the equipment, you can't do the work you're there. If you don't have the poles, you cannot put the poles up and start running the wire. It's horrendous.
Yeah, and if you don't have the political backing to make it happen in a reasonable amount of time. Okay, so they're there. Some transformers have been ordered. Could they be ordered in a way that makes it faster? Could it be prioritized? It almost certainly could, but it's not. I mean, if the White House wanted, they want to talk about infrastructure this year. If they wanted to show how great they are at building stuff, here's an amazing opportunity that you could right a terrible environmental wrong while making the lives of a lot of people a lot better. American citizens, they could go in and they could do that. This could be like our short-term Apollo project. We could hit this thing and fix it. But instead, this is, as many people have pointed out, Donald Trump's Katrina. But it's his Katrina that nobody really cares about. Very few people talk about it. It's not getting discussed in government. And it's believed that over 1,000 people, either immediately or as a result of the flooding and all that, have died. American citizens. And it's silence for month after month after month.
I think part of the problem is that most people I don't want to say most people because I don't know what the numbers are, but based on what I've seen from our politicians, there doesn't seem to be this notion that Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens. They don't get perceived as U.S. citizens, even though they are. And I think that mentality is what is contributing to the slow developments in Puerto Rico right now. But there's another political component to this that I really want to touch on because it's very important and it shows you just how far Republicans are willing to go to exploit a terrible situation and try to get ahead politically. Now, it's clear that there have been hundreds of thousands, if not more, Puerto Ricans who have left the island and they are now seeking refuge in U.S. states. Florida being the first state that they go to for obvious reasons. Now there have been as many as 300,000 Puerto Ricans who went to Florida, many of whom I should say settled in Central Florida. And there is an organization that's funded by the Koch brothers that is offering them services to get back on their feet. But even though they're saying we're a nonprofit organization and we're not trying to do anything for political reasons, what's going on behind the scenes makes it appear very different from what they're alleging. So it's known as the Libre Institute. It's an offshoot of the Libre Initiative, a group backed by the billionaire Koch brothers, and it's launching new outreach programs this week in the Orlando area designed to provide English language courses and civics lessons to thousands of Puerto Ricans living at least temporarily in Central Florida as the island continues rebuilding. So state officials are greeting Puerto Ricans arriving at airports in the state, and they're referring to the Libre program for assistance. So they're coming to Florida. Republican politicians are getting in touch with them and letting them know about this program. Florida also faces an open gubernatorial race, a competitive re-election fight for Senator Bill Nelson, who's a Democrat, and a handful of congressional races that could tip the balance of power in the House of Representatives. And so I want to be clear about something. There's the Libre Institute and then the Libre Initiative. The Libre Initiative is not a nonprofit, and they're very obvious and clear about their political agenda. The Libre Institute, they say, is their nonprofit arm and that they don't try to politicize anything. But from what I've read, they emphasize things like, oh, the free market and this and that. And so they're trying to, set these essentially Puerto Rican refugees up to support their party.
I went to two in the 2016 election during the primaries. I guess it was during the primaries. I went to two Libre Initiative workshops, one in Nevada and one in Florida. And I don't know about the Libre Institute, and maybe some of these workshops were set up by the Institute. I don't remember that, but it was all part of the Libre Initiative. They had their convention that I wasn't able to go to in New Mexico then. And what they do is they invite new Americans in, quote unquote new Americans that they wish weren't here, and they give them because they're very scared about the growing Latino influence in politics and population. Right. And so what they want to do is, because their politics so adversely affect these incoming immigrants, so much so that they're fought, they want to at least make sure that they are welcoming on the ground. So it's like a welcome wagon where they help them with voter registration. They help them with driver's license registration. They help them fill out forms to apply for apartments and background checks for dwelling. And it was a fascinating thing to see. And then they do talk about America, and they talk about where you can get information in America and things like that. It's clearly trying to say that we are this group, and we are this group that is associated not directly with the politics, but with the politics of the Republican Party, but then we can guide you in that direction.
Right, and they have been criticized in the past for passing out political literature that they're not supposed to be passing out.
They didn't do when I was there, but I knew that they did it every other day.
Right, I mean, look, the Koch brothers are not funding this out of the goodness of their hearts because they want to help refugees from other countries.
Right.
I mean, there is a political agenda there, it's as clear as day. And it's interesting to see how it's gonna play out because from what I know of Puerto Ricans, they usually don't lean right wing like Cubans do.
And Cubans don't really anymore either. I mean, the new Cubans.
The younger Cubans don't.
Obama
Older
won
Cubans
Cuba.
certainly do.
Obama in 2000. 2012 won the Cuban vote, and that was only 5-6 years ago now. So
in 2012.
In 2012, yeah. In the Cuban vote in Florida, yeah.
Fascinating. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
that's
so
really interesting.
It's a very changing demographic, and well, as you said, the Puerto Rican vote generally is already there, and it's big in Florida and New Jersey.
Yeah.
New York.
Okay, we got to move on to other news, and this is an update on a story we did last year. A Google engineer who was fired for spreading a controversial memo in regard to gender differences and why women are less likely to be engineers is now suing Google for its decision to fire him.
Fired.
James Damore is his name, and if you can remember the coverage we did of the story, I was the only one who defended him because I read the full memo and I didn't think that it was being portrayed accurately by other media organizations. I honestly did not think he should be fired. However, the lawsuit has a couple things that I think are worth dissecting. And maybe I changed my mind about him a little bit, so let's get to that. He is suing because he feels that Google is purposefully discriminating against white conservative males. And so let me give you the case. Damore said in a lawsuit filed in Santa Clara Superior Court that the search giant, quote, singled out, mistreated, and systematically punished and terminated employees who deviated from the company's view on diversity. Damore and a second plaintiff, David Goodman, another former Google engineer, are seeking class action status for anyone who identifies as conservative, Caucasian, or male. Now, so far, the lawyer representing them and hoping for this class action lawsuit has not found any other former or current Google employees who fit this, fit this description.
And want to sue.
And want to sue, that's what I meant, yeah. So here are some other accusations that were filed in this lawsuit. Google's management goes to extreme and illegal lengths to encourage hiring managers to take protected categories such as race and or gender into consideration as determinative hiring factors to the detriment of Caucasian and male employees and potential employees at Google. So, but it's mostly employed by white men, isn't it? I mean, and by the way, I don't want white men to be discriminated against, right? And
I certainly don't.
And let me also be clear about something. There are accusations in the lawsuit that they get, they don't use the word bullied, but that they get insulted and ridiculed openly. And I don't want that to happen to anyone. I don't care if you're conservative, I don't care if you're white, I don't care if you're black, it doesn't matter. No one should have to deal with that type of environment. They have to prove it in this case, obviously, but that is what they're alleging. Let me give you some more details. They claim that the presence of Caucasians and males was mocked with boos during company-wide weekly meetings. If they can prove that, that's terrible. Like, why? I mean, that is not that creates a hostile work environment. But again, they have to prove that happened.
Yeah, if it's true, that's bad.
Damore frames himself as a model Google employee who received 8 performance bonuses.
Oh man.
And $150,000 per year in stock. It's in stock bonuses, guys. In stock bonuses. Well, that's not his salary. We're talking stock bonuses.
Hey, we could have become programmers. We could have.
I'm not gonna lie. I am not smart enough to be a Google engineer. Yeah. I will admit that through and through.
I took computer programming in college, but I'm a white male, so probably it was discrimination that stopped me.
Get out of here.
I didn't have a computer in college.
So
did anyone?
Bob Curtis from Jacksonville on my hall. He had a computer. He had an Apple IIe.
It was the second one.
Right.
So here's where Damore really starts to lose me. Damore was surprised by Google's position on blatantly taking gender into consideration during the hiring and promotion processes. But why is that a bad thing? Look, if Google was a company that demonstrated that they have like a 75% female workforce, and they're like, you know what, we don't want any more white dudes. Like, we just want women and minorities, and we're actively going to extreme lengths to not hire white men. Then I think you have a case. But the biggest argument against Google has been that they don't have enough diversity, and the numbers, prove that. And so it's just interesting that, look, they're being pushed to consider gender because people want equal representation within this giant corporation.
And the equal pay thing at Google is really, this shouldn't cloud that, because that's legitimate. I mean, I don't know how frivolous this is, and God forbid I ever say anything's a frivolous lawsuit again, right, John? But the
I don't know what you're referring to.
You don't know what I'm talking about. No, but
Could you check the archives?
The pay gap is incredible, and that is something that's a real problem at Google, and that has to be addressed, and this kind of stuff shouldn't distract from that.
So there are two lawsuits. There's this lawsuit that we're talking about right now, and then there was a lawsuit filed in regard to that pay gap. And so you have like two lawsuits that represent extreme ends of the spectrum, and we'll see how it plays out. But based on what I've read from Damore so far, look, I don't think he should have been fired. I'm gonna be clear about that. However, he's not really making a strong case that there is like blatant, terrible discrimination against men at Google.
Yeah, he could do that theoretically. If the boos were happening at weekly meetings, it sounds like there were a lot of people, there were a lot of witnesses, they could talk to people.
Right.
If this stuff was happening, that would be bad. But if it seems like he's trying to make the case that the tech industry has been taken over by gay black women, and I have a feeling that's not actually the case. I mean, it's predominantly white men. I was a computer programming student. I've read about Silicon Valley. If it goes to the lengths that he is describing, then fine, you can do something at that point. But there is like a misconception lurking behind his lawsuit and inside his brain. The idea is he wants to get to a point where white men have an equal chance, and they don't right now. But the reason that gender is being taken into account is because we are not unbiased in the way we hire historically. Basically, from the first time a monkey started walking upright to like 6 months ago, when you would go in to get a job, the person that was considering hiring you they're running all of these different things through their brain, and whether you're attractive or not, whether you're tall or not, what your race is, what your gender, all of that is influencing the chance of you being hiring. That is the default position for humanity. These new policies are attempting to create something more equal, not something more biased, something more equal.
So here's where he completely loses me. Damore also says that he felt forced to attend and participate in diversity training events. Yeah, that's what everyone does. I have to do it, everyone has to do it. I mean, I have to do a 2-hour sexual harassment training tonight after this show. It's part of corporate life. Like I kind of want to. I mean, why should I have to take a 2-hour class because you dudes
Well, I walked in here. I walked in here today, and as a white guy, I was
awesome. They haven't done anything, but I'm just saying.
But I was booed as a white guy walking in here today.
That was personal.
That's true.
That wasn't about race.
All right, and then finally, the lawsuit is alleging that the company keeps or maintains separate lists of conservative personalities, including conspiracy theorist Alex Jones, to prevent them from stepping foot on Google's campus.
Good.
And yeah,
because he's crazy, not because he's conservative.
You know why that's good? Because, I don't know, Exhibit A, take a look at this.
Disingenuous, fake, false, broke back, twisted. A defiler, a betrayer, a backstabber, a devil! You will pay. Yeah, you think I don't see your face, scum? You don't think I don't see you, Stelter? I see you, you understand me? I know what you think of me and my family. I see you right back. You understand that? You understand that, Stelter? Stelter. You will fall. You will not bring humanity down. God is going to destroy you. Get him off the screen. Oh, God, they're so evil. Just please, God, free us from them. They're drunk on our children's blood, for God's sake. Okay, I'm going to stop right now.
Yeah, maybe don't name Alex Jones in your lawsuit if you're trying to make a case that Google is being discriminative.
If you were going to compile a list of the people who would bring down humanity, Brian Stelter is like in the 30s tops.
Right. And how many people, with all due respect to Brian, how many people have heard of Brian Stelter? And this guy's going on this rant about how this guy is the end of the world.
But he's drunk. Our children's blood.
Well, that's right.
Our children's blood.
Are your children drinking so much alcohol that their blood is itself alcoholic? What points are you making?
I don't know. We talked about that story last Friday. You should go watch the video on that because I don't want to rehash.
Did you talk about anti-Semitism with that story?
We did. We did.
Oh, by the way, so I just because I go to Media Matters every once in a while, I saw there's a clip. I didn't read the transcript or watch it, but he heard the rumors about Oprah running, and he has opinions.
I know.
What do you think they might be?
Anyway, I would be much more concerned if Google didn't want to keep that guy off the Google campus. So we'll see how this hashes out, and we'll keep you updated. But for the moment being, we got to take a break. When we come back, more news for you guys, including a video featuring a teacher being abused that enrages me. You do not want to miss that story. Come right back.
T-minus 1 minute till landing. TYT broadcast controllers, listen up. Give me a go, no go for landing. Sound?
Audio is hovering at minus 12 decibels. We're go.
Streaming?
We're go.
Camera crew?
We're go.
Mission control?
We're go.
Snacks? We're good. Iguana? Sir, we are go for landing. Okay, everybody. I want this to go off without a hitch.
Sir, I've been looking over this joke for the past hour, and with the bandit firing now weeks old and waning in
English, Johnson, English. What are you trying to tell me?
This joke isn't going to land, sir.
Okay, everyone. Forget the old plan. From this moment on, we're improvising a new joke.
So this is where the show started, and this is where it was supposed to end. Now the joke was supposed to land here, but that's not gonna happen, obviously. So we need to come up with a new joke. Maybe here?
The hits are dropping, streams are failing, retweets are stopping.
40 seconds.
All right, team. We gotta find a way to make this fit into a joke about this that will appeal to them.
30 seconds.
A Trump joke's our safest option. Trying to land a Trump joke after this week's events is a suicide mission.
We are officially out of time. We need to act now.
Sir, I think our best course of action is to let Jink try to land a dad joke.
That's the deal?
That's the deal.
All right, everyone, to their stations.
Led by Germany, and some of the creditor nations like Netherlands and Finland.
Cameras, position. Social media team. Brace for unfollows. 10 seconds. As for the rest of us, all any of us can do now is wait and hope.
This is gonna be the worst disaster TYT has ever experienced.
With all due respect, sir, I think this will be the finest hour 2 yet.
Giving mood. Angela Merkel's government seems to have signaled pronounced.
Come on, Jink.
Everyone, it's been a pleasure streaming with you.
Greek Prime Minister immediately picked up the phone to Putin and said, "You Putin any money in?" Okay, anyway.
TYT crew, the joke has landed.
You have in common with your daughter?
I was going to say sex, but I can't relate that.
He said I had small hands. They're not small, are they? I never heard that one before.
back to the Young Turks. Anna Kasparian, John Idarola, Michael Shore with you. I don't know why I went in that order. There was no reason for that.
That's all right.
I'll get over it.
Youth.
Okay, a few TYT lives for you. Hammer says, if you're an elected official and gain millions as a public servant, you're probably corrupt. I'm sorry, guys. I really apologize about my coughing. Daniel Pareja says, Puerto Ricans aren't perceived as US citizens because they don't have voting representation in Congress, nor do they choose electors for president.
Yeah.
So you're right.
Which could be fixed.
Unless they come and settle in the US mainland, which I didn't know.
That's right.
So they are allowed to vote in the primaries, but if they want to vote in the general election, they have to be in the US mainland
And
as residents.
with due respect to Daniel too, I don't know him, so I don't know why he's due respect, but I like him because he's writing in and he's a human and he seems smart and interested, so I like him already. But that if this were happening in Washington, D.C., which also doesn't have votes in Congress other than their representative, they're no more represented in Congress other than the fact that they can vote for president. They're no more represented in Congress than Puerto Rico is. If it were happening in D.C., it would be over. Everybody would be fine now. You know? So there is a difference there.
Absolutely. And then Gabby Marita says, whenever the Koch brothers do something seemingly out of the goodness of their hearts, be very, very suspicious. Yes, definitely.
I mean, my immediate reaction was, this is probably overall a good thing. I mean, a lot of these people, like, they have political views. They're not like, they weren't born yesterday. Like, they do need help when they move to this new area. They'll get it. And how many of them will really be strongly influenced? I don't know how many.
It's certainly a smart thing.
Look, I think that the last several years have made it clear how easily people fall for propaganda.
Yeah. That's
and
true.
that is not an insult to Puerto Ricans. That is just an observation I've had about people in general. So
I know. I want them to be helped.
Of course, I want them to be helped
maybe
too.
Maybe nobody else is.
But if they genuinely cared about helping them, then maybe they would, provide, relief to people in Puerto Rico. They're not interested in helping out of the goodness of their hearts.
There's
a
always an
political
ulterior
agenda.
motive.
Exactly, that's the problem.
I'm actually going to be starting up an organization purely for the goodness of my heart. It's me and George Soros, and we're going to be helping them out and then giving them books to read.
Just the two of you. It's just the two of you.
Yeah, he's mostly doing the money.
Right.
I'm gonna keep it real.
Right.
Moving on. A recreational basketball team consisting of high school students has been banned from playing for the rest of the season following an outraged parent who drew attention to their jersey selection. They refer to themselves as the Wet Dream Team, and their jerseys contain some racial statements that of course, are offensive. So Tony Rube is the name of the father who spoke out against this. He says those names are not having fun. It's not so much even if we had black students, he's a white guy by the way, or African American students or any minority students, our kids were offended. So he's saying, look, this is not to save face for minority students in the area. Apparently the area that they're in, King Mills, is pretty white, but they're
Which
saying,
makes this even better. I mean,
it does make it better because I'm glad that he stood up and said something about this, and it's now become a national story as a result. He's saying this is unacceptable behavior. They should not be, first of all, named Wet Dream Team, but more importantly, the names that they had on the jerseys were deeply, deeply racist and offensive.
Do we have any?
Yes, so we have one of the photos. One said knee grow, knee as in knee on your leg, and then grow as in a growing plant. But obviously they were trying to, make a statement about.
There's a lot of work to go to for a really bad joke.
Another student, I should say, had a jersey that just said coon on it. So just blatant.
Why did they think it? I mean, I never know. This is a stupid question, but why did they think it was funny? It wasn't funny.
It was just so brazen.
When it's funny, and you're like, they shouldn't have done that, but that was funny or whatever. But this is.
I mean, this seems to me like I spend a lot of time online, and there's a sort of juvenile desire to shock. I mean, under the heading of trolling, like it's just like we just want to bother people.
Right.
Oh, you guys are just getting bothered by this when they're basically conforming their entire life in a way to desperately attempt to get someone to respond in that way. And they're young, so it's not going to be clever. It's not going to be funny. It's just going to be crass and obvious and disgusting.
Sometimes students will do things spontaneously that are terrible, and the parents or adults around them didn't see it coming, and they couldn't take action before things got out of hand.
You're both right.
But in this case, that is not what happened. The coach for the team obviously knew that they were wearing those jerseys.
They had them printed up.
They had them printed up, and his non-apology was ridiculous. So let's go to that. He said, "We sincerely apologize to anyone that was offended by the jerseys. We offered to cover them up or change. However, the league saw it fit to remove us, and we have accepted that decision."
They actually conceded faster than Roy Moore.
Everyone has conceded faster than Roy Moore.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I don't know exactly what the punishment should have been, but the problem is with this sort of situation that, okay, so you throw them out of the league, but let's say, I mean, that doesn't solve it. Having them covered up doesn't solve it. I mean, these kids and the adults around them have serious problems.
it's the adults around them that have
but the kids
serious
wore
problems.
them.
The kids wore them.
The kids
but
obviously weren't super offended
by it. Do you know
by
what humans are? We're uncivilized little animals.
That's those are a couple of the problems I'm talking about. Yes, we have problems.
And their knees aren't little animals. And the adults around us are supposed to help us grow into productive, respectful human beings, right?
Best case
and that is
scenario.
not what's happening in this situation.
Yeah.
So I think that's the main problem. Look, they're high school students. I'm not trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. They made the decision to wear these jerseys, and it was a terrible decision. But at the same time, their coach apparently didn't think it was a good idea to take action prior to this, and who knows, what they're hearing from other adults around them. That's the depressing part about all of it, because these are younger people are supposed to be a little better than that when it comes to race issues in America. But I guess in some parts of the country that's not the case.
I think it was apparently an apology from the coach. So is he an adult or is he maybe 18? Is it all kids?
Yeah, some of these coaches are 20.
Yeah, so they're all kids. But and I don't mean it's actual kids.
There's no 20-year-old name.
Yeah, but not even like actual kids. So what it is, it's a failure in parenting and adults in the room, which weren't apparently there or condoned it. Again, this was like high school age guys. Maybe some of them weren't paying for it. Their parents had to pay for it. Like, oh, what's this going to? Oh, going to my Negro jersey, Ma. And they went, oh, good, great idea, Jim. So then after this all happened, no one says anything. The apology is apparent when it says, we're sorry if anyone was offended by our stupid ass jerseys. No, that's not an apology. You don't know what you're talking about. What you're trying to do is still cover up for what you've already failed at in the first place. So you've cemented your ignorance and your perpetuation of the ignorance with your kids. So fuck you.
Yeah.
No one has to accept your apology. I've always said that. You can apologize all you want. I don't have to accept it. Move on. I know who you are.
It wasn't even a legitimate apology.
They don't want it to be that.
Yeah, it wasn't really an apology.
They're not trying to make it that. They're just trying to move on and hope people forget about them.
All right. I try not to start every story with all right, but it's a bad habit, and every time I do it, I cringe. Sorry. A teacher in Louisiana was forcefully removed from a school board meeting and then promptly arrested and sent off to jail because she had the audacity to question a $38,000 raise that the superintendent was getting.
Damn.
While the teachers in the school district haven't received a raise in years. Deshia Hargrave is her name, and we're about to show you some excellent reporting from KATC, a local station in Louisiana. Now, this is the area, or the school district, I should say, is known as the Vermilion Parish School System. And the superintendent told KATC Monday night that he called to ensure that police knew the school system was not pressing charges against her, but she was booked anyway. Now, during this meeting of the school board members, they were discussing whether or not they were going to give the superintendent a raise and whether or not they were going to renew his contract. They did decide to renew his contract. It's a 3-year contract, and they did decide to give him the $38,000 raise. Now, the teachers were not supposed to ask any questions, but the point was for people to be able to give public comment on this situation, because this is a use of taxpayer money and people should be able to voice their opinions. Well, apparently they didn't like her opinion and she got arrested. Take a look at this video from KATC.
Teacher Daisha Hargrave spoke up during public comment.
Because it's basically taking out of the pockets of
Her issue, the superintendent's new contract.
a superintendent or any person in a position of leadership getting any type of raise. I feel like it's a slap in the face to all the teachers, cafeteria workers, and any other support staff we have. I have comments on the
She received a warning. It was public comment only, not a question and answer session, although board officials were answering her questions.
You have just voted.
After being called on a second time, that's when a city marshal stepped in.
Excuse me. Is it against policy to stand? Sir, do not. This is the most disgraceful.
Hargrave left the meeting, but in the hallway,
Right now. What are you doing? What are you doing? Don't. Can you explain? Are you kidding me?
Stop resisting.
I am not. You just pushed me to the floor. Sir, hold on. I am way smaller than you.
Hargrave has good reason to be upset at the pay disparity here, because if you take a look at this chart, graphic 51, you'll see the maximum amount that teachers in the school district can get paid. So if you are an educator with a PhD, the absolute maximum you can make is $58,861. Now that's not a small amount of money, but it's still the maximum that you can make in the school district. And again, teachers haven't gotten a raise for years, and so they're frustrated at this situation. But if you look at the superintendent, as I mentioned, he got a $38,000 raise. His salary increased from $110,190 to $140,188.
Wow.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's a nice little boost there. I mean, that video, I think, especially like for people who watch the show a lot, and we see, especially the town hall stuff, like that video is America. Like a regular person stands up, says, hey, this seems kind of effed up, but like someone who's already doing way better than us suddenly gets this huge influx of money and we're suffering here. And so you send in the authorities and they drag him out forcefully.
Drag a school teacher in southern Louisiana out like that. They're not pressing charges, the school district.
Yeah.
But they also, now the issue seems to be who it was that instructed the marshal to go over there. It was the marshal acting on his own, but I don't think it looked like he was acting on his own.
So I did a little digging to learn a little bit about the school board, and the person who ordered the marshal to take her out was Anthony Fontana. He is the head of the school board. He happens to be, as far as I can see, the only registered Republican on the school board.
He was in the video.
Yeah, he was in the video. You can see him give the nod, like get rid of her. And you're right in that we don't know whether or not the arrest happened because the marshal decided to do it, or if there was a member of the school board who told him to do it. But the superintendent does not want to press charges. School district does not. She didn't do anything wrong. Oh, she asked a question, which by the way is an incredibly legitimate question. A, that's taxpayer money, and B, when are we going to look out for the educators here, who oftentimes have to spend money out of their own pocket to provide supplies for their students? When are we going to value those teachers? You know, and
once
you're right,
he hits 200,000 a year, then we'll start to value them, okay? He's still got a couple more bumps to come.
And you're right, John. The reason why this story stood out to me so much, aside from the fact that it has to do with education, which I care about a lot, is it's a microcosm of what's happening in this entire country right now, where you're not even able to question why the system is rigged against you economically. You're not even allowed to call out those in positions of power without worrying about retaliation. We're supposed to live in a country that values freedom of speech, that values being able to, speak the truth and fight for what you think is right. And we're seeing that get violated left and right all the time while we're distracted by nonsense. You want to talk about free speech issues. Free speech issues, sure, happen on college campuses where conservatives want to provoke protests. But more importantly, they happen in situations like this where the powerless continuously get crushed for no reason at all.
That's why those right-wingers are going to be doing videos about this.
Oh, sure, I'm sure they're very concerned about it.
I think that school board does care about freedom of speech, and they know that money is speech. They just wanted to give him a lot of speech. like 38,000 speeches more each year.
And the idea that this was just a comments, this was to air your comments, but no questions.
What did they want her to stand up and clap?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, they did actually. I mean, that wouldn't have gotten her escorted and then later arrested. They threw her in jail. She had to post bond.
Well, and the thing is too, like, so obviously just what you saw there, terrible. But imagine if you're that woman, he comes up, he starts to push you down. If you pay attention to the news, you've seen that go way worse any number of times over the past few years, where she ends up with a terrible injury, ends up dead potentially. Like that sort of thing happens off of absolutely nothing, seemingly on a weekly or monthly basis in this country.
Yeah. Anyway, I want to thank the local news stations that are keeping a close eye on that story. Yeah. And if you want to watch the full report, you can do so by clicking the link in the description box. All right, moving on to the final story in the rundown today that I have to talk about.
You said all right again.
I know, I can't help it, I'm sorry. It's like the worst habit that I have.
It's all right.
Let it be the worst habit you have, then you're fine.
No, I think I probably have worse habits. I don't know, but I'm not gonna call myself out and tell you what they are.
I could remind you of a few if you want.
Shh.
All right.
Look at this discrimination against white men at TYT. Boo. I just shushed you. Okay. Donald Trump has a religious advisor. If you can recall, her name is Paula White, and she is one of these people who has gotten incredibly wealthy through the prosperity gospel. She essentially lies to a bunch of people and scams them into giving her a lot of money. And 2018 is no exception. She is now pushing for something known as first fruits, which sounds really weird.
That's what Roy Moore wanted.
But we'll explain what it is. I'm trying not to, let's not go off the rails here, okay? Let's talk about what first fruits really are. So Paula White is urging her followers to donate a first fruits offering of up to their entire salary for the month of January to enjoy blessings for the rest of the year or suffer the consequences of failing to follow God's command. So here's what she told her parishioners. Each January, I put God first and honor Him with the first of our substance by sowing a first fruits offering of 1 month's pay. That is a big sacrifice, but it is a seed for the harvest I am believing for in the coming year. And God always provides. What?
You better provide after you've given up a 1/12 of your salary.
The difference between, and so she also differentiates between those who tithe and those who contribute for the first fruit.
Also, it's January, right after the Christmas month, when everybody spent more than they could probably afford.
I mean, wow. Okay, so the difference between tithe, this is her speaking. The difference between tithe and first fruit is all of it. All of what? Well, if you want to bring God all of 1 day's salary, 1 week's salary, or 1 month's salary, that's between you and God. I try to bring a month's salary, but at the very least, every year I give God a week's salary. Like, she's trying to convince people to give her a significant portion of their pay. And we're not talking about rich people. Like, she's not hanging out with the Koch brothers and asking for maybe $1,000 at the beginning of the, no, she's like, these parishioners are not wealthy people and she's totally taking advantage of them. She also says God claims the first of all things, it rightfully belongs to Him. So why are you telling your parishioners to give you money? Because you're not God. I know you think of yourself as God. I mean, she is just openly taking advantage of them.
They should all get together and decide to give their first fruit to another church. Just say, all right, we'll do it. You're
I'm sure
right.
she'd love that because this goes to God either way.
Nah, she wouldn't love it. That's not, she's not after getting these other churches rich here.
Churches are tax exempt and as a result are supposed to be apolitical, but she is obviously political. She is in Donald Trump's camp and she's simultaneously scamming all these people out of money.
Yeah. See, I think we need to be aware of our biases. We're on the left, we're secular. Okay, so it's easy to look at the prosperity gospel churches and say this stuff is just a scam, it doesn't actually work, and yet you've covered a lot of these prosperity gospel people. The people who run these, a lot of them have private jets. Obviously it's working.
This is
How do you argue with the results, Sana?
And look, I know that there are some members of the audience who think, well, if these people are not smart enough to avoid getting scammed, then they're getting scammed. That's on them. But you got to remember, religion for a lot of people is something that they turn to when they need hope. And to know that they get exploited like this, we should do what we can to help them, not criticize them or ridicule them or insult them. Like my mom, she doesn't believe in prosperity preaching or anything like that. But religion for her is hope. It's that faith kind of keeps her going. And in her darkest times, that's what comforts her. And I think a lot of religious people believe what they believe because of that. Right. And I feel terrible for anyone who falls victim to Paula White and her scammy ways.
Yeah. And also, especially not to go over, but because it subverts or co-opts like a good impulse where some of humanity, not enough, but some wants to help people and to give, let's say with tithing, to give 10% of your earnings to try to make people's lives better would be a good thing. But if it's instead going to a church, and if it's a church that doesn't actually use it for the community, if it's just for the enrichment of the religious leader, then that's even worse, because it doesn't just deprive people of their money, it deprives people who need that money as charity from ever getting it.
Right.
I mean, you could be a total atheist and doing something like tithing, going to an organization that deserves it. That would be a great thing.
Right.
But these are sharks, basically.
Right. It's money that goes towards someone who wants to live a lavish lifestyle and do nothing positive or productive for humanity, and that's terrible. Yeah. All right, we actually have time for one more story, 3 minutes, so let me get to it. North Korea and South Korea have opened up talks, and it has been in the works since July of 2017. South Korea elected a more liberal leader, and he has been pushing for talks with North Korea since. And so North Korea decided to go ahead and have that conversation. And so far what we know is that it is de-escalating some tension between both countries, and the Winter Olympics, which will take place in South Korea, will now have 2 figure skaters competing from North Korea. And so this is a really fascinating development, especially when you consider the fact that Trump recently or is considering attacking North Korea to show that I don't know what he's doing. I don't know what his reason is.
That they're big, strong alpha men.
Right.
Yeah, and it's a particularly scary thing because like these South Koreans who have every moment of their life have lived with the possible immediate death from an attack from the North, now are like, well, maybe there could be diplomacy, except maybe this external force, the US, could ruin it all. Because of course, if war starts, Americans will die, but far more South Koreans will die than Americans. They're the ones who would actually pay based on what Trump might want to do. But yeah, it's great to see it. I mean, for all we know, it could just be posturing, it could just be part of larger negotiations, but if there was any chance that they could actually get over this longstanding divide between the two, that would be historic. It'd be amazing.
So according to reports, both countries also agreed to hold military talks to diffuse border tension and reinstate a military hotline. So that was according to the South Korean government. So that's, it's good news. It's a little bit of progress. Hopefully it remains in that trajectory.
Hopefully we don't screw it all up.
Right.
Because we're the only ones who probably can.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Well, we are out of time. Thank you, Michael Schur, for joining us.
Great to be here. Both hours today. That was
nice.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a test run. We'll see what people thought.
Yeah, we'll wait for the results.
Hopefully, I'll be back tomorrow. I don't know. I have to see if TYT will invite me back.
Is Cenk going to be here tomorrow?
I don't know.
I think that
he is. Yes, Cenk is back tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay.
That's good news.
Of course. John has a show coming up. He's filling in for Cenk for Rebel Headquarters, so make sure you guys check that out. And then afterwards, we will have a post game. Thank you for everyone else, though. Have a great night. We will see you soon.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Rebel Headquarters, and another pair of awesome candidates that we're going to profile, learn a little bit about what they stand for, what the stakes are in those elections, and hopefully through the process of many of these, get to know a little bit more of what's going on the ground across the country. But before we jump into that, I just want to say in yesterday's episode, I interviewed Kathy Glosson, who's running in the primary for the Iowa governor's seat, and I happened today to come across there was, I believe, at the Capitol in Iowa, there was a demonstration, and there she was. And she was organizing, she was speaking. I was like, hey, I just talked to her. So a fun little consequence of yesterday's episode. And we can expect a lot more of that from many candidates as we go through the course of this year and more episodes of the show. With that said, why don't we turn to our first interview? We are joined by Skype by Bill Cimbrello. Welcome to the show, Bill.
Thanks for having me, John. Appreciate it.
So, Bill, you are running against William Keating, the Democratic incumbent in Massachusetts' 9th district, correct?
That's correct.
So give us a little idea, before we jump into the issues and his record, what is the 9th district like?
The 9th district is actually geographically one of the largest districts in Massachusetts. It consists of a great deal of the South Shore going up almost just underneath Boston. It also includes the entire Cape Cod and the islands going out to Provincetown. So it's geographically, it's a big chunk of land to walk.
It must be. I actually spent a little bit of time in that area when I was growing up. I grew up on the East Coast, actually. Right. So, and the reason I asked that question, of course, is it gives us an idea of the sort of issues that are going to be most salient there. I mean, I'm sure, like you said, you're walking around, you're getting a feel for what people care about. Before we talk about those issues, though, let's talk about William Keating, the incumbent. He's held the seat for, it looks like close to 4 years at this point. And what is his record like so far?
Well, he's a career politician. He's what most of us would refer to as a centrist Democrat. And he has voted in the past for to expand the surveillance state. He's voted. He's got a D rating from normal. And if you look at his voting record, if you hold up a scorecard, maybe it doesn't look that bad on the surface. But it's really the issues he hasn't brought up that, to me and to my constituents, are a cause for concern. Mm-hmm.
And I know that you've pointed out before some of the potential influences on his votes, some of the donors that he's had in the past. Absolutely, the majority of his donors are corporate donors. Of course, he's got the military-industrial complex is donating to him, and he's also supporting the Affordable Care Act instead of single payer. He's never brought up anything with regard to forgiving college loans, which I do, and a whole slew of issues that, again, need to be addressed. The 9th district, as you might imagine, based on the geography I described, has the largest chunk of ocean in Massachusetts. There's about 200 miles of coastline here. And we, in this district, above anybody else, who have a thriving fishing industry and a thriving tourist industry, should be really, really concerned about environment, rising sea levels, changing water temperatures that affect fish migrations. We need to have sustainable industries all the way around, but the fishing and tourist industry are of prime importance here in the 9th. Yeah. And so what it sounds like is most of his votes probably sound okay, but what the people of the 9th need is actual leadership, someone who's going to push for a bold agenda on a number of these different issues you're talking about, both economically, but also in terms of healthcare and in terms of the environment and things of that sort. Is that basically how you're forming your candidacy, is wanting to provide more progressive leadership if you were to take the seat?
Well, yes, and in addition to that, I mean, I have very specific platform that, as I say, addresses single payer. I would like to see free education, both for college and vocational training. I also would like to forgive college loans or restructure them. I do believe that education is a right, and I also think that we made a grave mistake when we eliminated college loans from being in the bankruptcy code as being dischargeable. Yeah. So I'd like to see those get put back. I support worker-owned cooperatives. Unfortunately, standard capitalism does everything it can. The banks, in particular, are really tough for loaning to cooperative businesses because they want one person to be able to hang, and if you have a cooperative, you've got many people involved. And we really need to make that easier. I support universal basic income and a number of other issues.
No, I'm glad to see you, especially right at the end, talking about the universal basic income. That's something that we've talked about multiple times on the show. And it's something that at the very least, we need to have sort of local examples of it. We need to try it in localities and states and to demonstrate the feasibility of it going more broad. I mean, I'm sure if we don't, at some point, more and more of Europe probably will, but I think that we should have a leadership position on that.
Absolutely, I would love nothing more to have a pilot program running here in, say, Fall River, for example, which would be a great place to start something like that.
So you've talked in some of the interviews I've seen with you about how you feel that William Keating is out of step and out of touch with the people of the 9th District. So as you're going around, I know that you have your platform, but as you're going around and you're talking to people, the voters, what sorts of issues are they talking about post 2016? What do they want to see addressed in this midterm election?
Well, it's pretty much what we've been enumerating here. We've got a situation where health insurance is killing people, ironically, with putting them into debt. And we've got a situation where many small business owners are really suffering with the Affordable Care Act, which is such a misnomer because they don't have an employer, obviously, that's paying a portion, and it puts a lot of burden on them. And every year they have to go out into the marketplace, reshop a new plan. Their employees then have to go repick a primary care physician. They have to learn all the little loopholes for that particular plan, what the out-of-pocket deductibles are, et cetera. So it's a time-consuming process to be part of the Affordable Care Plan, where if we had single payer, it would really free up a tremendous amount of resources. It would be a shot in the arm to the economy if you think about the millions of dollars nationally that would be going into the economy for other things.
And would certainly be far, far simpler. As you pointed out, the current system and the system that we had before, both incredibly complicated for people who are already really busy in their day-to-day lives. Much simpler if we had a system much more like something in Europe or something of that sort. One thing I wanted to ask you about has to do with your background. So you're a businessman, but also a former environmental chemist. And I know you already brought up the possible rise in sea levels. So you have a background in science. I know that far too little of Congress currently does. What do you think that background in science could help you bring, both in terms of the political activism that you already engage in, but also were you to win the seat?
Well, I'm a big proponent of the Green New Deal. I definitely want to see renewable energy really take off. We really need to embrace Tulsi Gabbard's off oil for a better tomorrow program. I believe that's what it is, HR 3671, if my memory serves me right. And if that bill hasn't passed by the time I get there, I certainly will co-sponsor it if I can, and would certainly vote yes on it. We have really got to focus. We only have one planet Earth. There is no plan B here. And once we destroy our habitat, there's no going back. And I think that has to be one of the most important things that we as a nation and as the people of the world really need to focus on. You mentioned my background. When I first started out of college, I went into the environmental field. And what happened is, the industries I was supporting, which was the metal finishing and the printed circuit industry, have all gone off to the Pacific Rim. Why is that? Well, two reasons: cheaper labor, but also environmental regulations that were not enforced. We've all seen the pictures of what China has become and the polluted rivers and waterways. And so, we ended up with cheaper products here, but look at the upshot of that. So we've lost businesses, we've damaged the environment, in some cases irreparably. Some of these heavy metals are never going to come out.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, and unfortunately, some of our political leadership right now would like to fix that situation by bringing the jobs back by having us have the same sort of environmental lack of regulations and things of that sort. Actually, I don't know if you saw in the news today, but Rick Perry's attempt to launch a multi-billion-dollar bailout for coal and nuclear plants was thankfully stopped. But I agree, we need something more like Tulsi Gabbard's plan, a new focus on clean energy rather than trying to double down on dirty energy of the past.
Right.
Well, so where can people find out more about your candidacy and where you stand on the issues?
Well, I have my campaign website, which is bill.cimbrello.com. Perfect, there you go. And the donation link is exactly right, thank you. And then volunteer, yes. But I'm also very active on Twitter, and my Twitter handle is @Bill_Cimbrello. And then finally, you can catch up to me also on Facebook with Bill Cimbrello as is.
There you go. Okay, well, thank you very much, Bill, for joining us on the show today. Very exciting discussion. Some of my favorite issues to talk about, and thank you for championing them.
John, thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
So when we come back from this break, we are going to have an in-studio interview, very exciting. But by the way, if you're watching this and if you are in an area where there is a candidate you would like to see either discussed or perhaps brought on the show, that is something you can do. You can email us at rebelhq@tytnetwork.com. But not just candidates. If there is an event, if there's a protest, if there's a movement that you would like to see either promoted or profiled on the show, you can email us at that address, and we would love to shine a spotlight on what else is going on around the country. We will be back in just a couple of minutes with another interview. Welcome back to Rebel Headquarters, everybody. We're joined now in studio by Ruben Major. Thank you for coming in and talking with us. So you are running for California Secretary of State.
Yes, sir.
You're launching into the primary. Incumbent is a Democrat, Alex Padilla. And so we're going to turn to Alex and his record a little bit later on, but sort of general level for some people who either have, I mean, obviously states are very different. California Secretary of State, it's a huge state, huge economy. What are its main responsibilities? What sort of job are you angling for with this?
The Secretary of State is in charge of election systems, largely in here in California especially, and then also in charge of business filings. And there's the keeper of state archives and notary public education training programs, and some advanced healthcare directive compliance issues, as well as corporate fraud fund. So it's a pretty different kind of position.
There's a mix of things there.
Yeah.
Definitely the election security is perhaps the big one, so we're going to return to that. But I was reading a Reddit AMA that you participated in, where you said that you didn't enter into this expecting that you'd be running for Secretary of State at all. It was going to be state representative. What made you change your mind?
Well, I was actually running for state senate in North San Diego County, and I was I was running on a platform of single payer healthcare. Now I'm a paramedic. I think that's very important, and getting just dirty money out of politics. I'm also not taking any corporate donations at all.
Important distinction.
Yeah, and you know, I started looking at the election-related issues because of what happened in 2016, both during the primary season and during the general, and just encountered a slew of issues in the primary across the United States that were quite concerning to me. But moreover, when I started investigating our state election systems, I found there to be a great deal of problems here in the state of California.
Well, why don't we start there? Why don't we talk about that? So, I mean, I think more than most, our audience is tuned into some of the historical and present issues with both hacking into the vote, but also stuff going missing, huge quantities of votes suddenly disappearing. So, in California, what actually went down?
Well, I would say I would start with there's kind of actually a longer history of what's been going on with our state elections, at least. In 2007, we had Secretary of State Deborah Bowen, who commissioned the largest study ever on voting systems, and what she basically said was that the systems were completely vulnerable, and they're ran by huge corporations, and these huge corporations she decertified them and said, you can't run the election systems anymore until these problems are shored up, and it just kind of sat on hold there. Well, what was concerning was in this report that was given is that the very first part says if you knew how vulnerable the election systems were, it would completely undermine your confidence in voting. And then I began reading it and I began looking at it just to see how bad the systems were and the vulnerabilities were. And it was just getting worse and worse. And I thought, I need to reach out.
Even after the decertifying of those particular companies?
Right, and there was just so many other problems. So, what I did was I just started going down the report, and I thought, we have to do something. So I contacted members of Congress. I spoke with state election officials. I even reached out to candidates, and I said, that you need to make this part of your platform.
It sounds like it would be a natural part of the Secretary of State's platform.
Right.
So we have Alex Padilla. We had the previous effort that you were describing, but with both Alex Padilla and outside of it, I mean, you reached out to them. But what has been done? What is currently being done?
Well, unfortunately, Alex Padilla supported a bill, AB 668, which was going to give these vendors $500 million more dollars, and so
the ones that hadn't proven themselves to be trustworthy in the first place.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Well, maybe an influx of money will make them act right.
No.
Probably not, no?
No,
okay.
They have not proven themselves.
Okay.
And I think this is a big problem that we have across the country. We use the same machines here that they do use everywhere else. And what we like to do is get these corporately owned software out of the election systems, replace them with publicly owned systems, printed paper ballots, and open source software.
Yeah.
Yeah, take it back.
Yeah, so, I mean, how do you feel about the upcoming election? I mean, there's going to be a lot of races going on in California. How much faith should we have in them?
Well, I think part of faith in lack of voter turnout, especially here in this particular state, we do have some of the lowest voter turnout in the country. I think a lot of that has to do with just not really understanding or people having an issue with how the voting systems are actually ran. And having confidence in it. And I think if we do a real assessment and we tell the voters and and we say there's problems and we identify them and talk about what we can do to fix them. Well, repair is probably a better word than fix, but I would say what can we do to repair these issues? Then people will be more confident when they're able to read reports and see what's wrong and know that we're actually addressing the issue. Yeah, and that's what we want. We want transparency in government. We want openness, and I think that's very important.
So as I said, I was reading that AMA, and in that AMA, they were asking some pretty technical, very specific questions. So you were talking about, we need to look into this, we need to figure out what we can do, but let's say you win, so what can we do? If you get the seat, you have at least some degree of power over this, what can we actually do?
Well, the very first thing that we can do is we can decertify these systems that Alex Padilla unfortunately recertified, and we can decertify them and say, no, they're not going to work for us. If they've got vulnerabilities and they're not meeting a minimum standard, and I think that the 2007 top to bottom review was a great standard. If they're not doing that, then they're not going to pass muster, and we can't certify them. And we need to start advocating for something that's publicly owned. I'll give you an example of why another reason why this is a problem, because DHS actually contacted a vendor here in California instead of the Secretary of State's office when they had a problem with an election.
They went straight to the
system.
company.
Yeah, and we didn't know about it. And so I think we need ownership over that code and that software and that information so that we can do what we need to do.
Yeah, it's kind of I don't know exactly who is the scary party in that, but if it's an end round around the person who's in charge of it and it's direct interfacing with the corporation, that sounds like, and our our elections are being determined by this. That sounds like something out of like a cyberpunk movie or something like that. So obviously we want a human component, we want the right human there. So one thing in particular, I know there was a lot of concern about how slow the vote count went the last time around. Is that something we should be worried about? I know that you've been following this quite a lot.
Well, I know I know that your studio and program actually did a story on the 2016 primary and some of the issues surrounding the provisional ballots and the crossover ballots. And I think
people being registered for the wrong party, not the party they thought they were, or
and this is a problem that I've seen nationwide. I've done a lot of research on this independently just to find out what was happening before I decided to run even. And they did have a problem in Brooklyn where we had a couple 100,000 votes, I believe, that were
100,000. That's a lot.
A big problem. Yeah. So the thing is we need to secure the voter registration rolls. We need to make sure that we're adding more enfranchisement, and I think this process here in California could definitely be shored up. With those provisional ballots, as well as the mail-in ballots, where unfortunately the ACLU is actually suing the current Secretary of State because minorities are being disenfranchised twice as often as those who are not. And
that's a story we've heard in other parts of the country as well.
Yeah, and that's another issue because we're going to more mail-in ballots, and those are our voters, and traditionally those are progressive voters also. So we got a lot of work to do there.
Yeah. So I mean, as you're touching on there, obviously we have the security of the actual vote, but then we have the widespread efforts at voter suppression and all that stuff. But it'll probably have to unfortunately be our last topic, but I know you've talked about net neutrality. Now there's this national conversation going on, and there's been some bad developments in that. But what about the possibility of something at the state level? If you become Secretary of State, is there a chance that something like that can be set up or at least pushed for?
Well, I think we have to try because we're at a critical moment in democracy right now where we're under attack in all sorts of different angles. And fortunately, we do have the ability to put up some stopgap measures here. To prevent these issues from getting worse. But yeah, I mean, definitely I'm an advocate to make sure that the internet is open, free, and fair to everybody.
Yeah, and we certainly we're a little bit biased in that. We're vested interest because being political on the internet, I mean, if somebody's gonna be negatively affected, we definitely don't want to see that happen, unfortunately, or fortunately, I should say. So we're running low on time. Where can people find out more information about your campaign, volunteer, donate, that sort of thing?
You can go to rubenmajor.com. rebelheadquarters.com, and I tell people make a major change because we definitely need that right now. And we want to bring a solution to the rest of the country. Basically, we're hoping that by shoring up these issues that we have with our machines and our process, that we can hold other secretaries of state accountable, other states accountable, and make sure that your vote's counting properly.
So you can provide a positive example for
Absolutely.
other states, because these are not problems just for us.
We're the tech center of the world. Why can't we do this?
Yeah, that's a good point. We have Silicon Valley, but we can't secure our own electronic voting systems.
There you have it.
Yeah, let's talk to Elon Musk. Bring him in. Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us in studio.
Thank you.
We're going to be following your campaign, and I'm glad to have somebody like looking at these issues on a daily basis. Okay, thank you for joining us. As always, for Rebel Headquarters, we will be back tomorrow with a couple more interviews. I believe Cenk will be hosting at that point, but thank you as always for joining us, and we will see you then.